If you are one of the 2+ million people who lost power from Beryl, you may need to take a look at the food that you have in your freezer refrigerator. The health department says you need to throw away any food that has been at room temperature for more than 2 hours, or of course if it has an unusual odor or color. Thawed food from freezers might be safe for consumption or refreezing if it's still partially frozen, but unfortunately we know this is all probably not the last time that we'll lose power. And so joining me this morning in studio to share how to keep our food lasting longer is the founder of milkandhoneynutrition.com, Mary Ellen. Thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, we hate to think about next time when so many people still don't have power, but really these are some easy things that we can do just as we're storing our food to kind of make sure that we can keep it after the next outage.
Absolutely. One of the best things you can do is have a full freezer. The more full your freezer is, the longer it's going to be able to last without power.
Yeah.
We know that you can essentially double the time that your food would get preserved. So if the more stocked your freezer is, if it's packed full, you're going to get about 48 hours.
I mean, and that's just because more frozen things in there will sort of
like we've got a chicken
cold.
Right here. This acts as an ice pack. It's helping kind of conduct those colder temperatures.
Right. And unfortunately, since we just had the outage in derecho, I know a lot of people probably didn't restock. And now we're like, oh, I'm glad I didn't have all those steaks in my fridge again. But that can actually help.
Right, and another thing you can do if you're like that and we know a storm is coming, water bottles. Throw as many water bottles as you can in there, and then that becomes clean drinking water that you have access to once it does start to melt, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very cool. This I heard about, but I did not do it before this time. It's like, you know, so we're going to tell you about it, and maybe you'll think about it, because you could just do this now. You don't have to wait before a storm. Tell me about the quarter trick.
Right, so this is particularly helpful if you're evacuating, and then you're going to be coming back home, but you can also do it if you're planning to ride out a storm as well. But you take a cup, usually about 8 to 12 ounces, and you freeze a whole cup of water. Leave some room at the top, put it in your freezer in enough time to get fully frozen before the storm hits, and you place a coin on top. What's going to happen is if your power goes out, that water, because the freezer is going to slowly rise in temperature, is going to slowly melt. And if that quarter has the opportunity to sink to the bottom, obviously it's not exact, different freezers are different, but it gives us an idea of how much thawing happened.
Right.
If you come home from evacuation and that water's frozen, but the quarter's sitting at the bottom, it tells you that there was a long period of time where your freezer was not working, and we most likely need to do the whole sorting process of what can be kept and what needs to be thrown away.
Yeah, I mean, you might come back and maybe it's like midway and it's still got some water on top, which tells you before your freezer came back on, it only got that far down.
Right, and in reality that kind of tells you that you're likely going to be okay keeping some stuff, rather than if it's all the way at the bottom, we're probably going to need to toss most of the stuff that's in there.
Yeah, so let's talk about meat. I mean, you mentioned that like this whole chicken like this or meat frozen can work as an ice pack, but then I come home and it's like, oh, it was like, you know, halfway down. Is it safe to keep that chicken or steak or beef, whatever you've got?
It's really up to you and your level of risk tolerance. We're going to say, you know, you don't want, if things partially thaw, like you said earlier, if they're partially frozen, most likely you're going to be okay refreezing them. If you touch it and it's still cold to the touch, you can see a few ice crystals, you're going to be good to refreeze. It's when we start to get above that 40 degrees for the 2 hours, sometimes 4 hours, depending on what the food is, you're really going to need to toss it. That danger zone of 40 to 140, if we're talking about hot foods, is really where bacteria has a chance to kind of grow at rapid rates.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And then what about processed foods? Like you've got a frozen pizza here.
So this was a perfect example I pulled out of my freezer this morning. So processed foods, same thing. If it's cold to the touch, it feels like it's been refrigerated, you can refreeze it. But if it's been above that 40 degrees for 2 to 3 hours, it's not going to feel cold. It needs to be tossed. We're dealing with things like cheese and eggs and meats and things like that. You just don't want to risk it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about sort of like the chicken or the food, I mean, a lot of times to thaw it, if you've got that in your freezer and you put it out on your counter that day, like not talking about a storm, where you're like, hey, we're going to make this for dinner tonight.
Right.
I mean, it can take a long time, and you know that it can partially refreeze, and then you may, I mean, it can partially thaw out, and then you may say, oh, we're not going to do that, and put it back in.
Right.
Sort of the same idea.
Kind of, yeah. It's just, remember, if it's sitting in your freezer, you've got a longer amount of time because it's really conducting those cold temperatures inside.
Right.
So.
And then the health department, we've looked at other food safety things, and they basically say with some processed foods and some things, a lot of times it's more about quality than it is about safety. Oh. Like some of those foods may take on a different taste.
Texture is going to change. If you notice a difference in smell and taste, though, that's a clear sign, like smell test, we need to toss it. That's bacteria has had enough chance to grow that you're noticing it. It's definitely time to get rid of it.
Okay, so what can we do with these containers when we're talking about ways to keep things cool?
So this is just another example of the water bottles. Like a storm is coming, you don't have a full freezer. What can you do to kind of pack that in if you anticipate a power outage? Fill up your Tupperware containers with water. Stick those in the freezer to kind of pack it out. If you have more than one freezer at home, sometimes people have like a freezer in the garage and in the house. Move everything to the same freezer. Okay. And then you're leaving that in there until the last minute. You don't want to open those doors. Once we hit 48 hours without power, you can open it up. You'll have like good drinking water to drink from. It's just another way to kind of stock your freezer. These silicone bags are kind of the same concept. Anything you can fill with water. If you don't have like ice packs or things like this, you can pack your freezer with.
Right, that was really interesting because now that the power is already off, my mom was saying on a text string yesterday she doesn't have power. Thinking maybe if I can go find some ice and then just put that in my freezer. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, maybe, you know, this is now coming up on 2 days without power.
If you have a full freezer, 48 hours is about the max on the best freezers that we're gonna see. You need to open the door and see kind of, is it still feel cold to the touch? Can you move it to another freezer? And the same is true for refrigerated things, but it's a much shorter time period. After about 4 to 5 hours, you need to take everything out of the fridge, put it in your coolers, pull some of your frozen water bottles out, move it to a place that can kind of maintain that cold temperature.
Right, yeah, Mary Ellen, it's not really a laughing matter for a lot of people who lost a lot of food, but we joked last time that cleaning out my fridge after the Durate show, I was like, I had these olives that I'd probably had in there for like going on a year and I hadn't eaten them, but I'm like, these olives are probably okay, so they went back in the fridge. I think this time though, we'll toss them.
Yeah, and I know it's hard to give up because, I mean, let's be honest, food is expensive these days.
Yeah.
But without power, do you want to be dealing with foodborne illness as well? Probably not. That would be like the icing on the cake of everything going on.
Exactly. All very good things to keep in mind for the next storm. We appreciate your help. Thank you so much for coming in this morning. We also have a story on our website, click2houston.com, explaining how you could get some money back if you have spoiled food. You could get up to $500 back. We're talking about possibly adding it on to any insurance claim that you may have to make to get food back if you have other damage to your home. Also, if you have a Lone Star card and you've already spent your money on food and then that was wasted, there is a way to file a claim and possibly get some money back for all of that food. Go to our website and search spoiled food for details on that.